sharing it on our website for those that might know others that were unable to get in because we did hit capacity. Additionally, I have everybody placed on mute just to help reduce some of the background noise. But at the end of the webinar, we are going to mute everybody and open it up for Q&A. In the meantime, if you have any questions, feel free to utilize the chat box. And additionally, I want to make sure that y'all notice on the materials tab, we have included a copy of today's presentation, as well as a voter education handout that we will be covering further along in today's webinar. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So vote like your mental health depends on it. My name is Andrea Crook, and I am the Director of Advocacy with Access California. And we're hosting today's webinar because we know that we're experiencing times like nobody in our lifetime has ever experienced. There's so much information, so much anxiety-provoking time. And so we really want to take this opportunity to walk you through the process in a really nonpartisan, non-threatening way. And so thank you so much for joining us. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my co-presenters to introduce themselves.
Okay, I'll go. Hi, everyone. This is Karen Vicari. I am the Policy Director for Cal Voices and Access California. And on this webinar, I'll be running through some of the, a brief summary of all of the ballot measures to hopefully help you become a little more educated. And Tiffany, she may be having audio problems. Why don't you try again, Tiffany?
All right, so we will, once Tiffany gets her audio worked out, we'll come back to her and give her the opportunity to introduce herself, and then she also has a couple slides at the end of today's presentation that she will be sharing with you. Okay. All right, so a little bit about Access. We are a program of Cal Voices, formerly known as NorCal MHA, and we are a statewide consumer-led stakeholder advocacy program. Access stands for Advancing Client and Community Empowerment through Sustainable Solutions. And Cal Voices, our organization was actually founded over 70 years ago in 1946. We are the oldest continuously operated consumer-run advocacy agency in California. And what that means is we are an organization that specifically hires people with experience. So today we have a pretty full agenda. We're going to take you through how and where to register, how to complete your ballot, how to ensure your ballot is counted, best practices for voting by mail. We're going to provide you with an overview of the 2020 propositions and provide you with additional information, some really good resources on where you can obtain more nonpartisan information. So COVID-19 updates. On May 8th, Governor Newsom issued an executive order, which among other things, orders that a vote by mail ballot be mailed to each voter prior to the November 3rd deadline, in addition to offering in-person voting locations. So any registered voter may vote using a vote by mail ballot instead of going to the polls on election day. I think it's important to note that we do have some individuals that are part of the Safe at Home program. And if individuals are a part of this, please do not use, vote by mail or online. And so we'll go over that a little more. So when you register to vote, so if you are registering or re-registering less than 15 days before the election, you will need to complete the same-day voter registration process and request your ballot in person at your county elections office or polling location. So you're going to need your California driver's license or California identification card number, the last 4 digits of your social security number, and your date of birth. And if we want you to note that your information will be provided to the DMV to retrieve a copy of your signature. And this is really important because when they go to compare your signatures, they're comparing it to the signature that you use for DMV. And if you're anything like me, I wrote my name much nicer when I was getting my driver's license than I do when I sign my checks. I kind of do the scribble scrabble with the check writing. So just make sure that you're using the signature that you used with your DMV registration, okay? Additionally, I touched on the safe at home participants. So when you go to registertovote.ca.gov, please note that this goes directly to DMV. And so what you'll want to do is you'll want to go to registertovote.ca.gov and go to the safe at home participants so that you can vote anonymously, okay? So some key dates and deadlines. So election day is November 3rd. So the registration deadline for online, for voting online and getting a mail-in ballot is October 19th. So that's why we're hosting it today, so that folks know you still have time to register online. You can do it you can do it online, or you can do it by mail, but it has to be postmarked by October 19th. You can still register to vote and vote all the way up to November 3rd, okay? For your absentee ballot deadline, you can request one by October 24th. So you have a little bit of leeway. And you have to return it by mail, and it has to be postmarked by November 3rd. So as long as you have a postmark and you mail it in on November 3rd, your ballot will be counted, okay? You may also choose to return it in person by November 3rd, and you have to return it by 8 p.m. So early voting has already started. It started on October 5th and will go through November 2nd. However, it's really important to note that the dates and hours vary based on where you live. So we're going to provide you with additional information at the end of today's presentation, but we really want you to know that you can still register to vote even on election day. So how and where to register? So you can register to vote by October 19th or at the polls through election day. So early in-person voting again has already started October 5th through November 2nd. You may cast your ballot anytime. Again, keep in mind that dates and hours vary by county. You may register to vote online, by mail, in person at a DMV, or in person at your county election office. Many post offices and public libraries and other government offices also offer voter education and opportunities to cast your vote. If you have previously interacted with DMV, the state has automatically registered you to vote. If you do not register by the deadline, you may register at the polls through election day, but you must vote in person. So if you go to registertovote.ca.gov, you may register online there, and you may also track your ballot there. It's really easy. They only ask you for your name, your date of birth, and your zip code, and they will notify you via text or email, whatever preference you have, and they will notify you once your vote has been counted. So additional tips, if you're going to go in person, make sure you wear a face covering. They are requiring this, and keep 2 arms lengths distance from other people. You want to wash your hands before and after you use sanitizer. They should have some there for you, or you can bring your own. And when you're voting by home, make sure that you're using a ballpoint pen, and it has to be black ink or blue ink. So if you like to use those gel pens, we really recommend that you use the ballpoint pen and fill in the bubble in its entirety, okay? Make sure when you're voting by mail that you seal the envelope that was provided with your ballot and sign it. You have to make sure you sign it. Oftentimes, individuals can forget that part because we're just so excited to get our vote cast. And then again, make sure you track it. I know California is under a microscope right now for a lot of locations that are not recognized by the state. So we want to make sure that you're going to the appropriate place and you're tracking it. Again, you can visit vote.ca.gov to register and to track your ballot. So Tiffany, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me now?
Yes, you can go ahead and introduce yourself now. Sorry.
No worries, no worries. So just very briefly, hello everyone. Sorry for the audio issues earlier, but my name is Tiffany Carter, and I am the statewide advocacy liaison with Access California. And I'm not going to take up any more time than that. We're going to continue on with this great information. Thanks.
All right, thank you. All right. Hey, with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to our policy director, Karen Vicari.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Andrea. You can move it on to the next slide. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about how to analyze a ballot measure, and then I'm just going to run through them all with some tidbits that I found out. So how do you analyze a ballot measure? You have this huge voter guide, and it seems pretty overwhelming. So start early. Don't wait till you get to the ballot box and suddenly decide to look at them. Maybe take a look at them now and start thinking about them. Read the summary or skim the summary in your official voter guide. Sometimes they're really pretty self-explanatory, and it's a no-brainer. Sometimes they get pretty complicated. So then you can visit an unbiased source, and these are 2 that I really love. There's links in the handout. There's handouts in the materials section, and there's links to these in there. Voter's Edge has both of these. Voter's Edge and Ballotpedia both really have a lot of information. They tell you who's supporting, who's opposing, where the money's coming from, what the arguments are. So I do really strongly recommend for any of the ballot propositions you're not sure about that you check out one or both of these sites. Next slide. So what do you look for when you're analyzing your ballot proposition? First, just what's your initial thought? Does that sound like a good idea, or does that sound like a bad idea? Read the arguments, because sometimes these ballot propositions will have unintended consequences. Maybe it lowers taxes, but then the unintended consequence is that it reduces county services. So it's always good to read the different arguments for and against each proposition. Look at who supports it and who opposes it. That's often a big clue. If you support a political party, a Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, whatever, see which side they're on, because that's often a good sign that a proposition goes with or against your values. And which groups are supporting or opposing it? Are there groups that represent somebody like you? Maybe you're a senior. What do the senior groups say? Maybe you're a veteran. Whatever sort of whatever characteristics of you that would influence your vote. See what groups like that are saying about it. And then the last one is, where is the money coming from? This is often a really good clue about the intentions behind a ballot measure. So, if it's there, like there's one today we'll go through that's entirely funded by corporations. Well, that might be a clue that there's ulterior motives on something like that. So those, I think, are the big things that I look at. But what happens if you can't decide? Well, you can continue to do research. That's always an option. Google it and see what people say. You can always leave that section of your ballot blank. I think every year there's at least one that I just don't know. So leave it blank. It's not going to invalidate your ballot, and maybe that's better than casting a wrong vote. I don't know. That's your choice. You can always choose to just follow the position. If there's one where all the groups you trust are in support or in opposition, it's probably safe to follow their position if you don't know. So I'm going to go through them. Proposition 14, stem cell research. This one is pretty simple. About 15 years ago, we did this once where we sold $3 billion in bonds to fund stem cell research. Well, that money's almost gone. So the Center for Regenerative Medicine wants more money. This proposition would authorize the state to sell $5.5 billion in bonds to support stem cell research. The only downside to this one is if a state sells bonds, that's like a loan. So that's money that the state has to pay back. So if this proposition passes, it's going to cost our state $260 million a year. The pro to it is $1.5 billion of this $5.5 billion is dedicated to conditions that affect the brain. So that's not just mental health, but Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, epilepsy, and mental health conditions too, hopefully will be researched with that $1.5 billion in bonds. And I think, often the $260 million is something that you might think about. Well, is that going to raise my taxes? Is that going to decrease services? And that's something that's always worth considering. I think one thing that's important on this one to me was Governor Newsom supports this. So that made me a little less concerned about the $260 million a year. But again, I encourage you to do your research on all of these. You can move to the next one, Andrea. Prop 15, commercial property tax. This one increases property taxes on commercial properties, so businesses that rent properties. It was actually the owners of those properties that are going to get taxed more. So because it raises taxes, it increases revenues, and it provides that 40% of the revenues raised go to local school districts and community colleges, and 60% of the revenue goes to local governments. So, we can't know. Every county or city is going to spend their money differently, but it's definitely possible, and I think even likely, that some of this revenue would go to increase local, county services that would benefit, anyone who uses the county services. The opponents of this one argue that those costs are just going to get passed down. So if you raise the rent on a grocery store, well, they're just going to make all the groceries more expensive, and in the end, it will hurt consumers. I don't know how valid or not valid that argument is, but it's definitely worth considering when you decide how you want to vote on this one. And this one is interesting because of the supporters, you can leave it there, Andrea, of the supporters of Prop 15, generally it's the Democrats, the ACLU, Equality California all support it, but the NAACP is opposed to it. And I think their concern is that it's going to raise costs and impact low-income people. So Prop 16, this one's pretty simple. There's really not a lot here. This is just a value judgment. Prop 16 would bring back affirmative action. We had affirmative action in California years ago, and we voted it out, but now there's an attempt to bring it back. And I think you probably all know what affirmative action does, but it allows the state and universities to consider race as a factor in hiring or admissions in an effort to increase diversity. So that's really all I have to say on that one. I don't think that one's too controversial. That's something that either you support or you oppose. Voting rights, Prop 17. This proposition would allow, currently in California, people on parole after a felony conviction are not allowed to vote. This proposition would give those people, once they were out of jail or out of prison, would give them the right to vote. And this one, I put on the slide, I found it a little interesting. 53 organizations, the last I checked, are in support, and only 3 organizations are opposed. So this is another simple one. Do you think people on parole should be allowed to vote, or do you think they shouldn't? The arguments are, well, the people that tend to oppose it are more the Republican side of things, who more law and order, who think that people on parole haven't served their time yet, and they shouldn't be allowed to vote until they serve their time. The supporters say, hey, they're out, they're reintegrating in the community, they should have a say in what goes on. Next one. This is another simple one, primary voting for 17-year-olds. So this proposition would allow someone who will be 18 on the day of the general election to vote in the primary election. So this election now is a general. Before the general in, I think, March, we have the primary where we decide who is going to be our presidential candidate. So supporters of this bill say, hey, they're going to be voting for the president during the general election. They should have a say about who that person is. People in opposition say that the 17-year-olds are too young and they might be influenced wrongly by their parents or by a teacher. Supporters say, they're voting in the general, let them vote in the primary. So I think that's a simple one. There's no weird glitches with that one. No unintended consequences with that one. Next. Prop 19, property tax transfers. So this one is an attempt to sort of chip away at Proposition 13, which limited people's property taxes. But the downside to limiting property taxes is that the counties don't have as much revenue. They don't have as much money for the schools. They don't have as much for county services. So there are continuous attempts to sort of chip away at Prop 13. This one would allow people over the age of 55, people who are, quote, severely disabled. And I searched, I couldn't find exactly what severely disabled means. So people over 55, those who are severely disabled, and those who have lost their homes in a wildfire, to limit their property taxes when they move. Because Prop 13, if you own a home, Prop 13 holds your property taxes steady with limited increases. Your property taxes don't increase as the value of your home increases. So if someone over 55 or someone whose house got destroyed in a wildfire wants to buy a new house, their new property taxes are going to be a lot higher. This proposition would limit that for those three groups of people. And there doesn't seem to be very much opposition on either side to that. The only sticking point on this one seems to be that the way it evens the playing field out is that people who inherit a home from their parents or anyone, if you inherit a home and choose to keep it as a second home, then you don't get these property tax benefits. And that one part of this proposition has a lot of people up in arms. You know, I don't know. If I got to inherit a home and keep it as a vacation home, I think I would just be happy with that. But otherwise, oh, and also the money from this one, the revenues from the increased taxes on the inherited homes goes to staff wildfire suppression. So the extra money goes to a good cause and something that could be argued we need desperately here in California now. That's all I have to say on that one. Next slide, Andrea. Proposition 20. So this one is solely aimed at putting more people in prison. It increases the penalties for petty theft crimes. Something as small as $250. You could be prosecuted as a felony with a sentence of up to 3 years. It also imposes additional requirements before somebody gets paroled. And the third one I think is sort of a doozy. It requires DNA collection from some adults convicted of certain misdemeanors with the goal of being able to convict them later using DNA if they commit a more serious crime. The impact on individuals living with mental health challenges of this one is only that people living with mental health challenges are overrepresented in the criminal justice system. And this will only serve to worsen that overrepresentation. And also, our jails right now are very overcrowded. We don't have a lot of jail space. In fact, we're letting people out because of COVID. So this proposition, if it passes, it will significantly increase the jail and prison populations. That's all I have to say on that one. You can use your judgment on that one. I'm trying to be neutral here. Proposition 21. This one is very tricky and very complicated. So I do urge you to do research on this one because it's hard to wrap your head around. We have two laws in California right now that govern rent control. AB 1482, and then there's another constitutional section. This proposition would end at least some of the protections from AB 1482. I'm not able to determine if it would end all of them or not, and I researched that one, so that's an unknown for me. AB 1482 was actually a good law that Newsom signed last year. And in this one, the support, again, is support and opposition isn't really giving us any clues on where people stand. It's being backed by the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. ACLU supports it, the Democrats support it, the LA Tenants Union supports it, but some of the groups that oppose it, NAACP, Disabled American Veterans, and then of course, the Republicans, and the Taxpayers Association, because they want more freedoms. They don't want restrictions on them. Next slide, Andrea. So Proposition 21 doesn't, it's apples and oranges. It changes the law it makes some things better, but maybe some things worse. Currently, the current law 1482 applies to landlords who own one property. Proposition 21 only applies to landlords who own 3 or more properties, so it won't give protections to as many people. Currently, rent increases are limited to 5% a year plus inflation. Proposition 21 really, it gives the cities and the counties the power to enact rent control. So cities and counties could do more than just what Proposition 21 says, but all Proposition 21 mandates is that landlords can only increase the rent 15% after someone moves out. So if someone's been there for 20 years and they move out, the landlord can only increase the rent 15% over what that person was paying. It doesn't specify limits on increasing rent while somebody is in a home. And the current law offers some eviction protections for tenants. Proposition 21 does not address eviction protections. So this one, like I said, is complicated. I do urge you to do your research and really see how this might impact you or your community. The opponents are arguing, and this is why the NAACP is opposed, the opponents are arguing that it's going to make landlords want to sell their properties and not want to be landlords anymore. And then there's going to be even less housing available, where the proponents say it's going to make housing more affordable, so it will reduce homelessness. And I don't know how to sort that out. I'm going to throw it back at all of you to do some research and come up with your opinions on that one. Next slide, Andrea. Prop 22, app-based drivers. This was big in the news last year. App-based drivers had always been contractors, not employees. And then that big law was signed last year that made app-based drivers employees. So that gives them, when they're employees, they get certain protections. They get overtime pay, sick leave, health benefits. And if they're independent contractors, they really don't have any protections. So Prop 22 will bring them back as independent contractors, but it does say that they have to be paid 120% of the minimum wage, but only while they're driving. They still don't have to get paid while they're waiting between calls. The companies have to provide healthcare subsidies for them, so pay some towards their healthcare. And the companies have to provide insurance for drivers injured on the job. The interesting thing on this one is that it is funded almost entirely. I think there was $200 not funded by these companies. $186 million was put in by 5 companies: Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Instacart, and Postmates. $186 million they put in to oppose this bill, to create this proposition, because they are opposed to their drivers being employees. Now, this is another one that I've gone back and forth on. I'd like to know what the app-based drivers think, right? I mean, they're the ones who are doing the work, and I haven't been able to determine really what they want. But I have to say, the fact that those 5 companies are putting so much money into changing the classification of these drivers back to independent contractors makes me think it might possibly be a good thing. I haven't made my mind up on this one yet, but this is one, again, where I do urge you to do some research and determine what you think is best. Next slide. Kidney dialysis clinics. This Proposition 23 would impose additional requirements on kidney dialysis clinics. So it would require them to have a physician on site at all times. Right now, a person undergoing dialysis, their physician only has to visit them in the clinic, I think it's once a month. So this would require the clinics to staff a physician all times. It requires state approval for clinics to close or reduce services. There's some infection data reporting requirements, and it would prohibit clinics from refusing to treat patients based on the source of payment for their care. The opponents of Proposition 23 argue that these extra requirements are going to force clinics to close. There's also a lot of medical groups opposing it, saying that it's going to worsen our physician shortage if all of these dialysis clinics need a full-time physician on staff. Supporters argue that the proposition prevents discrimination and protects people in rural communities. What I found of interest to this one is that only 23 organizations are in support of Proposition 23 of putting these additional requirements on dialysis clinics. 131 groups are in opposition, including the Hepatitis C Task Force, the Medical Association, the NAACP, the Minority Health Institute. So in this one, looking at who supports and opposes it is sort of giving me some clues on what the best choice might be. Again, I haven't made my final decision on this one. I do suggest that you go onto the sites and read some of the arguments for and against and decide what you feel is right. Next slide. We're almost done, guys. You're doing good, hanging in there. We only got 2 left. Proposition 24, data protection. This is another sort of confusing one. This would expand California's data protection laws. We enacted some pretty strong data protection a couple of years ago, and I think now you see at the bottom when you log onto a website, accept cookies. That's from our latest data protection law. And Proposition 24 is intended to strengthen those even further. And it also creates the California Privacy Protection Agency, which would enforce the law and give penalties to businesses that aren't following it. But it would also remove some of the protections that exist today. It reduces the number of businesses that are subject to the law. And the opponents argue that there's provisions in here that say that companies can offer financial incentives to people to consumers if consumers agree to share their data, and that could be discounts or money. So the opponents are arguing that this isn't going to help the lowest income people, right? It's sort of a pay to play system, and the wealthier people can afford to opt out, where the lower income people are going to rather take the incentives to have their data shared. Next slide. So this Proposition 24, the last I checked, only has 15 supporters and 62 groups in opposition. Supporters, some of the supporters of relevance include the NAACP, Peace and Freedom Party, Consumer Watchdog. Opposition is the Republican Party, but the ACLU also opposes it, and the League of Women Voters, the Alliance of Retired Americans, they also oppose this, and there's a lot more opposition than support. So this is another one of those that's sort of confusing, and I urge you to do some research to determine which side you fall on. Next slide. I think this is the last one. And cash bail. This is another one that is a little bit tricky. So this one would replace cash bail, the cash bail system, with risk assessments. And the argument is that wealthy people can afford bail, but people with less money are stuck in jail awaiting trial. So it's intended to create fairness in the system. Some of the opponents, though, the reason people oppose this one is because they are afraid no one knows what the assessment system will look like. So will the assessment system be discriminatory? Will it discriminate against people from certain neighborhoods, people with a certain skin color? Will it discriminate against people with mental health challenges? So all I have to say on this one is if Proposition 25 passes, advocacy is going to be the key, right? We're going to have to be there, be active on the ground to make sure that these assessments are fair, that they're based on actual risk, not some factor that somebody thinks is risk, like skin color or the neighborhood that somebody comes from. And that does bring one more point. You know, none of this is final, right? I mean, it's not the end of the world if it turns out you voted wrong. All of this can be fixed later. And so for something like Proposition 25, maybe because there are so many unknowns, but because there's opportunity for advocacy to fix the unknowns, maybe something like this would be a vote of support for the idea of ending cash bail, rather than worrying too much about what the assessment's going to look like. But again, that's a judgment you have to make for yourself. So I hope I didn't create more questions than I answered, and I hope this was helpful to you. I'll turn it back over. I think I'll turn it over to Tiffany.
Yes. Thank you, Karen. That was awesome. That was a great breakdown of everything that we have on the ballot this year. So I'm going to jump right into this next section and just provide a little bit of information on some tips regarding unbiased information. With information being so easily accessible, it's important to be mindful that not all information is accurate information, right? So these are just a few ways that you can identify if the sources that you're using, whether that's the news articles or outlets, websites, social media, blogs, that they're credible and unbiased so that you can make the decision, not someone putting little tidbits and tips into you to kind of sway you. So the first one is that the particular source you're looking at presents facts only, that objectivity is the goal, right? So if you can read the information regarding the propositions or candidates as neutrally as you can read instructions for a bike or a recipe, then it sounds like you've probably been provided a facts-only source, and that objectivity was the goal in that particular compilation. Additionally, if it's scholarly or peer-reviewed, it's most likely unbiased, right? So keep that in mind. The next one is that there's no sensationalism. The Oxford American Dictionary defines sensationalism as a way of getting people's interest by using words that are intended to shock you, or by presenting facts and events as worse or more shocking than they really are. So oftentimes you'll find this in like the titles or headings of articles or videos. Media outlets use this to prey on your emotions for clickbait, right? I don't know if you've ever read an article that the title said something completely different than what the actual article was. And that's what you want to stay away from, is sensationalism. The next one is that there's no spin towards a political stance. Even without putting a title or a name to the viewpoint that is provided by the author or the writer, whatever you're reading, you can tell where their beliefs lie. And so if the information that they provided is one-sided, then that most likely is just a good tip that they're leaning more one way than the other. You really want to try and look for sources that will provide both sides as much as possible, kind of evens it all out. Karen's breakdown of the different propositions in the previous slides were a perfect example. The next bullet is that it will provide you with pros and cons. So a part of being unbiased is the ability to provide good information. And that's good and bad, right? And that's without emotion or an argumentative point of view. So providing pros and cons will allow people to formulate their own decisions based upon what they're willing to give and take, where their passion, where their morals and values lie, right? So pros and cons are definitely something you wanna look for. And then the next one is that it cites its sources and that they're credible sources. You should be able to find links and resources for the information that was provided to you, especially if it's a news article. But don't stop there. Just because they provided some links and some resources, not all citations are credible. So be mindful of that. So it's really important you do have to do a little work in order to make sure that you feel good about the decisions that you're making, that you're getting good information. Next slide, please. All right. So continuing on, the next one is that the source that you're reading or listening to, it doesn't use negative language. Tech boomers stated that if more than the facts are stated and there are repeated sentences that are outright insults to a person or an organization, there's likely a moral or political bias present. So keep that in mind. If there's slander involved, things that just don't feel good, that kind of conjure up some negative emotions, most likely that's not a source that you want to utilize. And the next bullet is that the facts check out accurately. Never take a meme or social media post or a debate or a news segment as solely credible. I think a lot of us have identified that now. Does it take some work? Yeah, it does. But you feel better about it. And in the long term, the decisions that we make are beneficial as much as possible if we just do our due diligence with checking out the facts. So always do your homework to find out if the facts check out. And if the numbers add up, if the stats are correct. Fact checkers are also a really good thing to use. And so there's 3 examples of some fact checkers that you can utilize here. There's allsides.com, mediabiasfactcheck.com, and then there's a Google Doc that was created that really broke down all of the websites that have been created by kind of phishing sites or sites that are just not credible. I'm trying to think of the specific word that is used, and I can't think of it, forgive me, but it's got a long list of websites that you can check out and just double check. Hey, I read this article on this site. Let me see if it's on this list. It checks out to be one of the unreliable sources, and here's why. So just remember that an unbiased source will really try to fairly represent conflicting ideas without trying to convince you that one is right. Just give you the facts. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Andrea, and you guys are almost done. Thank you.
All right, so we know it can be a little overwhelming trying to process all this information and, also know if you're getting the correct information. So no matter which way you're voting, it's important to look for unbiased, accurate coverage. That way you'll know you're making the best choice for yourself and the people around you. So here are some really great tools that we encourage you to check out. They're all completely nonpartisan, and I'll give you a brief overview. So Issue Voter, This is I've actually really enjoyed doing research for this webinar, and this is one of the ones I actually created an account with, and I was so impressed. You do need to create an account, but it's super easy. Just name an email. And it's an effective way to use your democratic power. And so the site gives you the opportunity to give your opinions and really weigh in on the political realm. So you're going to start by selecting issues that you have strong feelings about, or if you know little or to nothing about. And when new bills related to your interests come up, you can offer your opinions and send feedback directly to your representative and track it if your elected officials voted your way. So they'll send you updates. For Vote 411, so this is a nonprofit site that was created by the League of Women Voters, and it is an all-in-one tool to compare candidates' positions side by side. You can even register to vote on this site. Then moving on to fact check. So this does precisely what it sounds like. So it really uncovers the truths and untruths behind everything said by political figures via videos, speeches, publications, and websites. So moving on to PolitiFact. This is another fact-checking site. It's actually a Pulitzer Prize winning site. And they use a really fun meter system to gauge the relative truthfulness of candidates' statements. And you can search by state or person or truthfulness, etc. And lastly, we have Rock the Vote. I remember this being a really popular back when I was in high school. So this is a nonpartisan site, and it's really geared towards younger adults and new voters. It is a powerful tool for anyone to keep track of, your own democratic responsibility and to complete the pledge to vote in the coming election. It makes it really easy for you to register as well. You will also receive reminders and information from your polling station and information on your district's elected officials. So these are all really great nonpartisan sites. And I'm sorry, it's stuck on this slide. Let me move forward. Tiffany?
All right. And just lastly, we want to just remind you guys of some important facts regarding in-person voting. So if you're not doing your ballot by mail, if you're going in person, keep these things in mind, that you do not have to vote solely at your pre-designated polling place. You can vote at any polling place, but some cities will assign you a polling place. And if that's not an easy destination for you, then you can go to the nearest polling place and ask for a provisional ballot. That is a legal right that you have. So keep that in mind. If you are in line when the polls close, you are legally able to still vote. So don't get out of line. Please encourage others to stay in line as well. They have to let you vote. So don't feel discouraged if you know that time is coming up, and you're still in line. You have the right to vote. And if you do not get out of line, you can still vote. They will not close without you. So keep those things in mind. Of course, voting early is the best way to avoid any of those particular issues. So if you're able to do so, get out there and vote early. And we always like to remind people of this amazing opportunity that we have, because this quote says, "I always wondered why somebody didn't do something about that. Then I realized I am somebody." And we all are somebody. So let's all get out there and do something about the things that are impacting our communities, our families, and ourselves. With that, I'm going to open it up for questions and discussion if you guys have any. I think we're going to unmute people.
Everybody, so feel free. Thank you all for your comments in the chat box. And Don't forget to download the attachments and let us know if you have any questions. Please note that we will be putting this recording on our website. So if you found it meaningful and you'd like to share it with your fellow peers and stakeholders, you may direct them to our website. And here is our contact information. And with that, we wish you all a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.